Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Come to Listen podcast. I'm Roger, your host for this show, and today we have a good friend of mine, Ranger Woodland, on the show. Ranger, welcome to the Come to Listen podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah, man. So, a little bit of backstory for those of you who are tuning in that maybe don't know the two of us. I was a resident advisor back in undergrad at CU Boulder. CU Business School actually did this really cool program called the Residence Academic Program, where freshman business students would have some courses within their dorm, and they'd all live with other business students, and it was kind of a nice networking opportunity. And some of the organic things that have come from that include Ranger and I's relationship, where I was his RA one year, and that's kind of where this whole thing started. And so before we get into the rest of the podcast, Ranger, what was that experience like for you, year one, undergrad as a whole, and then maybe we'll jump into what you've done since then after that.
I had the greatest college experience ever. I'm super grateful. It all just came together exactly how they portrayed it in the movies. Like freshman year, found a random roommate who's still a close friend of mine. I talk to him all the time. His name was Bear, or Matthew. He goes by Bear. He and I got along great. He was from Colorado. I was from California. So he showed me around the mountains. We climbed some mountains together. We skied all the time. He made me a much better skier. So I really learned a lot about the Colorado way of living from him. And so that was cool. The business school is a great community. There's like 1,000 people per class in a business school. So 4,000 people out of a 24,000 person school, but it kind of felt like high school. I felt like I knew most of them by the end of the 4 years. And so now I've got this great distributed network around the country of people in finance and accounting and marketing, and there's a great camaraderie amongst Leeds buffs, as we call ourselves. I think, at least. And anytime I get on a call with someone who went to CU Boulder, it just feels a lot warmer than if they were a random person. So I had a great time, and I felt like I learned a lot of really relevant stuff for the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, 100%. And before we get into everything with Analyst House and your journey and all that, I thought one spot that would be an interesting place to start here is you'd mentioned recently that you have an interest, or you really enjoy, or you might be pretty good at poker. So can you tell me a little bit about how that's been a part of your life and how that's shown up for you in different ways?
Well, at school, I went to school during COVID. I think you were probably out by then, Roger. But my junior year, they sent everybody home this spring semester. But they brought people back to school in the fall. And so, big events were canceled. So I found solace to some extent in these little groups of people around campus and around like the student housing, getting together and playing poker. And it started like as just a couple friends, and we played probably every day for 2 weeks. And then everyone except for one or two of us got burnt out. And then I just wanted to play nonstop. Schoolwork was like first, and then was poker, and I would play till the wee hours of the morning, like several days a week. And that's another community I built at Boulder, was this like hardcore poker playing group, and we all watched all the poker vloggers on YouTube. And during COVID, I also I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, but I downloaded an online poker portal, or 4 or 5 actually, and I deposited some Bitcoin and I played 200,000 hands of online poker during COVID, like thousands of hours. And I lost all my money a couple times, and then I learned, and I eventually barely made it back. But now, I feel like it's taught me a lot, and it's another side community of people I met at Boulder, and so it's not as much of a part of my life right now, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting. It has a lot of like parallels with starting a business and entrepreneurship, and especially investing, like venture capital. And I think every business owner should probably think about their business kind of like poker in some ways.
Yeah. So like for me, I got into poker. Of my like core group of friends from high school, one of their dads was I don't know if he had been like, I think he was like a card dealer in the Blackhawk casinos at one point, but he was really good at poker.
Yeah.
And he taught us all like how to play. And so we would all get together and we would have poker nights all the time. And those are some of the like community moments that I cherish most for sure. And that's built these deep bonds because you're there till, 1, 2, 3 in the morning trying to finish out the tournament hand, and the stakes get high, and it's super engaging.
And you learn a lot about a person it's kind of a microcosm of life. You can do everything perfectly and the results can be super shitty, or you can do everything. You can take a really poor line, like an uneducated line, and still win. And in those moments where things don't go the way that you expect them to, I think you kind of see a person's true colors to some extent. And anyway, that's mostly the part about poker that I think parallels the real world. And I feel like one poker night with someone, you can learn more about them than like a year of drinking at a bar.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's two pieces there that really translate for me, and that's strategic risk and reading people. And so maybe you could talk about either or both of those and how those have kind of shown up for you in your actual life.
Yeah, I've rarely made a decision on the second one of those, reading people. I in my poker, especially because I played online for the most part, I didn't put too many eggs in the like reading a person basket. I was much more kind of like into I guess in online you have this little display that overlays the person's username, and it shows you their statistics. It shows you like how often they play a hand and how often they raise and how aggressive they are. And so you can kind of like understand, if you have a large enough sample size, usually like 100 hands with them, you can get a feel for how they play. So I never really bought into the reading people side of things that much, but I think people can read me pretty easily. So the strategic risk side of things, I mean, it applies a lot to my life and my business. And basically the goal with poker is like, when you have the best hand, or you almost have the best hand, you should put as much money into the middle as possible. And I think that rule applies in business as well. It's all about like kind of small bets, but when you find something that works, you need to consolidate your resources and really like go deep and bet big and take a risk, because all of the money is made on the river and the turn on the last two cards. Like it's a compounding pot size, at least in No Limit Texas Hold'em. So the same is true in business, except there's the river, then the turn, then you have like 100 more years that you can build. So it's all, all of the returns come down the line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. No, I do agree that and so it seems like with what you're doing with Analyst House, you feel like you've got a pretty good hand. So maybe you could explain to us what Analyst House actually is, and if you could, and feel free to take some time here, give us the backstory, like how you actually ended up starting your business.
Yeah, should I talk about the media experience here as well?
Yeah, I mean, let's go all the way back. So you were in what, like your junior year or something like that? You were looking at what you were going to do after school, and we can just go from there.
Yeah, Sure. I would say the entrepreneurial story starts even a bit before that. I was maybe like 9 or 10 years old, and my friends were. I felt they had a lot more freedom than me. I was a first child. I was like, I need to get out of the house already, and I was like, driver's license 6 years away. Mom and Dad, are you gonna give me a car? Or am I gonna need to buy a car? And they were like, we will contribute. We'll match you up to $3,000. And I was like, okay, game on. So I started picking up jobs left and like wherever I could find them. I was umpiring baseball games. I was like a terrible baseball player, but I was like the greatest umpire on the field, and they paid us for like 2 or 3 hour games, $20. And then once you turned 12 or 13, you could start announcing baseball games, which was really cool. So they'd give you the microphone, you'd read people off as they were going to come up to bat, and they paid you $25 per game for that. So like minimum wage, basically. And I did that. I delivered newsletters for my mom's real estate business. She would give us 10 cents per newsletter, and if she closed a deal, she would give us $50 in commission, which in retrospect was that was theft.
Yeah, right. That's not exactly 10%, but hey, you were a kid. It didn't work.
Yeah. So I made a couple bucks that way. Probably made like $1,000 doing those things. And then my church at the time was doing kind of an auction, like a silent auction, a donation thing for charity or something along those lines. So I gave an hour or two of math tutoring because I was decent at math, and that student wanted to continue with the tutoring, and then they started paying me, and then they referred me to a few people, and then I was overwhelmed. So, but I didn't want to just kind of give up free money. Actually, that was my thought process there. So I hired a couple friends, and then that was like my sophomore year of high school. And then by my senior year, we had like 30 high school tutors who performed about 2,000 hours of tutoring in my local area.
Dude, what? I had no idea. So that's like a full-on entrepreneurial business. Is that still going, or did you just call it quits when you were finished in high school?
It's 7 years later now. I still get text messages every once in a while. The Facebook page is still up and running, so you can get a little like flashback in that way. But it's over. I tried to kind of pass it on to my brother to manage, but no one really can love and appreciate something like that as much as the founder. And also, there was no process. It was like I just fielded text messages, and then I farmed them off to my tutors in a group message, and I tracked it in a very kind of defunct Excel sheet, our revenues and my cut. And then every once in a while I would text all the tutors like, Venmo me your cut. So it fell apart my sophomore year of college. I got some amount of like earnings my freshman year of college, but yeah, that was the first entrepreneurial experience I had. And we made like $50K my senior year amongst all the tutors. And then I tutored some personally, but then I took a cut of everyone. So my take home was like 10 to 15,000 of that, which is, I felt I avoided all traditional jobs throughout my childhood. That was like my main thing. So that takes us to like the start of college. And I was like applying to college for physics or business, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So then I visited Boulder, really enjoyed it. I got in for business. So I started as a business major and a physics minor. And then I had to take a W in a calculus class because I can't blame it all on the professor, but it was tough. Everyone in my class dropped, basically. They canceled the section because everybody dropped. So I had all this time, and I was like, I'm going to put all these math credits towards quantitative finance, and I got a minor in math. And I was like, I'm going to do the banking or like quant route. I'm going to become a trader, or I'm going to work on Wall Street. I'm going to make a lot of money. And then I'll figure out what I'm going to do from there. But then one day, my junior year, I was just scrolling LinkedIn, which I've been doing for a long time now. And you reposted this super kind of niche article that our school journal kind of picked up and reposted about a couple of PhD students who had started a mycelium-based meat company. They were going to make whole cuts of meat out of mycelium, and they had just raised $5 million, and you said mycelium meat FTW for the win. I was like, this is dope. I wanted to work in sustainability of some variety since I was a young kid. So food systems are fairly fucked up. I was like, this has a lot of potential to be really cool. And I scrolled their LinkedIn. They had no one working in accounting or finance. So I scoured the web for the founders' email addresses. And I found them, and I sent them this manifesto, this very long-winded email about how I can bring value to their company. And they called me in, and I went in, and they're like, all right, we'll hire you 5 hours a week. You'll be an intern. We'll pay you $15 an hour. And I showed up on the first day, and I sat on a couch for the first year. But anyway, that was the intro to media. That was kind of a long answer, but I can go into the meaty stuff now if that's relevant. But you tell me, what do you want to hear about?
Yeah, no, man, that's a great spot to start. And I think there's other pieces that maybe we'll catch up on later in this episode or at another time about, time in the great outdoors. And, you mentioned church, so we talked about faith too. But I think let's continue on the story, because I'm sure people are wondering, like, okay, what is meaty? What happened? There's many people who romanticize that intern on the couch experience, and not many people that have had that. So yeah, tell us about that, and tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so they had just raised, it was 2019. They had just raised a seed round. It was $5 million. I showed up about a month or two after that. They were using those funds to kind of put together the first pilot scale facility to prove out that this product could be manufactured at more than just kind of a couple pounds a week scale, so it was still a very kind of novel concept and process. The process wasn't developed yet. And so I show up the first day. They give me access to the financial model that they had used to raise their $5 million round. They gave me access to QuickBooks, where their bookkeepers had been doing all of their accounting. And they said, hey, we've got a board meeting in 2 weeks. We want to build some slides. Can you just put together some financial slides for the board? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I still have them. I look back, they're heinous. They're really bad. Thank goodness they were all scientists there working at that time, because if they had worked in business, they would know that doesn't fly very well. But yeah, so then over the next 2 years, I grew in scope. So I was doing maybe 20 hours a week by the time I graduated in 2021. And I spent a summer away from media working at a bank. I was going to do corporate banking. It's kind of one click down from investment banking, working with public companies, giving them big, billion-dollar debt facilities. But it's mostly just kind of like a glorified salesperson at that point. And I got a job offer to return to San Francisco and work for them. And I called the CEO at Meaty, which at that time had raised a Series A. So they'd grown quite a bit. They raised $28 million Series A, based on kind of there being a lot of demand for the product and the product being really kind of novel. It forms this whole muscle meat structure. Just the way that mycelium, which is the root of mushrooms, forms, it kind of takes on this muscular structure and mouthfeel. So it was a kind of new concept. So we raised that Series A, and I called the CEO. I was like, hey, I'd like a job, please. I have a job offer for 80 grand plus a 50% per year bonus. Like, give me your best offer. And he was like, I'll pay you 60 and no bonus. And I said, I've got to follow my heart here. Like, I am more passionate about startups and entrepreneurship, and I'm going to be doing the same shit as every other banker, handing out loans. It's just a repetitive job, and it was so much more exciting and energetic and meaty. So I accepted his job offer and spent the next 2 years there. We raised a Series B for $50 million. So then the pilot plant was a success. We were going to build out the mega ranch, which was a 110,000 square foot manufacturing facility in Denver, which at full utilization is one of the single largest protein producing ranches in the United States, all in like an Amazon warehouse sized piece of land. So we bought, so that was going well, and it was 2021, and VCs were really, really like looking to throw cash around. That something about zero interest rates and COVID and FOMO and cryptocurrencies, and everyone was just trying to kind of use up their funds so that they could go raise a new fund. Perhaps I'm oversimplifying it, but you have to use your first fund pretty much to go raise the second one. So Meaty, on both its merits and this kind of VC craze, raised a Series C for $150 million in 2020, late 21, early 22, to continue building out the mega ranch and scaling manufacturing. And then I left and started Analyst House. But there's a little more to it than that. But that was my background in startups.
Nice. Yeah, I was reading an email that you had just sent out the last day or two, and it kind of was like the initial journey and some of that, and then how you started getting into Analyst House. And one of the things I think is really cool about what you do with Analyst House is you're super transparent about the journey and your financials and even your cut of your financials. Like, there's nothing that you're not showing about how the business is growing, and it translates to your target market of people starting their businesses, and you hit those in different ways. Before we get into different avenues to start businesses and maybe some advice you can give to people who are getting innovative ideas off the ground, what are you doing with Analyst House, man? Like, what actually is this, and how's that journey been so far?
I've evaded the question long enough. Analyst House is my first real venture since I've been an adult. We are an outsourced accounting and finance firm for startups and growing companies, with a technology twist. So at Meaty, we had a lot of kind of big dog execs from food companies who came in, and I'll say food companies are not exactly known for their like technology adoption, I would say. So I did a lot of stuff the old fashioned way, and I often came to the leaders of the company and said, look at this. We can do this so much faster and easier, and was met with a lot of resistance. And oftentimes I did it anyway and kind of came to them and said, look what I did. Like, I just saved us, $100,000 a month and like a full-time employee worth of work in my last week of experimenting. And then they accepted it. But I just wanted free reign to implement those strategies with startups that were at an earlier stage where they wouldn't even have to experience that pain and hire that extra full-time employee just to figure out that they didn't need to hire that person because they could have automated this work. So it's a lot of accounting and finance automation. No coding at this point. I think there's so much you can do with out-of-the-box tools and integrations, and Zapier kind of connects a lot of these systems, these disparate systems together to create really scalable processes for growing companies. And so we do full stack accounting and finance for startups.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of an interesting like synergy there between what you're doing now and what I initially did out of college is I was at Deloitte and I was on the advisory side. So we were auditing the systems that were producing the financial statements for accuracy, completeness, things like that, making sure it was doing what it was supposed to do. And I totally saw something similar, which was that the more steady state businesses that had been around for a long time had antiquated systems. And maybe they had been updating them, but it seemed like there was a lot of bloat on those IT and finance teams as well. And so what is that, like if you're working with a company who has that bloat, or even if you're working with a newer company who sees that and is looking to avoid that, what are the strategies? Like what are people actually doing to create more of a lean startup with real-time financial information, making strategic decisions from that?
Well, I have yet to earn the opportunity to kind of come into a company with an established accounting and finance team. You know, accounting and finance typically make up, I don't know, between like 3 and like 8% of a company's revenues as far as costs. So it's not a huge, it's a large spending bucket, but like it's not humongous. I would love to walk into a company that has 100 employees and 8 people on the finance team and like map out how they do things and solve those problems. Unfortunately for them, it would probably eliminate the need for some of those jobs. But I do think that's where things are heading. For now, I'm working with smaller companies and trying to build the systems from scratch so that they can work with an outsourced accounting and finance team at a much larger scale than was previously possible. I mean, my grandma owns a small business. She's 79 or 78 or something like that. And she does everything on graph paper. She tracks all of her expenses extremely diligently, but on graph paper. And at the end of the year, it's like a 3-week exercise to type in all the numbers on the calculator, and then get her taxes filed. And then there's like the second wave of accounting, which was using technology systems that kind of came around in the 80s and 90s, mostly the 80s for the first time, like QuickBooks. And they were all hosted locally on people's computers, so there's kind of no cloud shareability between these financial systems. But the latest wave of systems is all cloud accounting. They're all interconnected. You can pull data on a minute-by-minute basis from almost any system, like any system, into Google Sheets or Excel or Power BI or some like reporting tool. And it just so many companies are not tapping into this interconnectability of all of these tools. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, one, to help a generation of companies grow up with a really lean accounting and finance team, but 2, to one day, once we've more kind of established ourselves as these accounting and finance tech innovators, come into these large organizations, tell them you're doing it all wrong. You actually need like 30% of the finance and accounting team and cost. And we're going to see billion-dollar companies with fully outsourced accounting and finance teams fairly soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a competitive advantage at the end of the day, Like if you can run that department lean and clean things up and your actual strategic information that you're handling as a C-suite gets better, like that's a pretty clear winning decision. But it does make it harder for the traditional finance students coming out of Leeds that are looking for that job that you're now getting rid of.
We're a long ways off of that,
yeah.
For sure. What were the companies you worked with at Deloitte? How large were those?
They were huge. Like Deloitte is, I think, most of the big 4 have a similar statistic because they all do different things, and you can't do all of the offerings that Deloitte would do with Pepsi, for example. I don't actually know if Deloitte works with Pepsi. That's just a big company example. But they work with like 85% of the Fortune 500 companies in some capacity. So huge balance sheets, huge income statements, huge teams, global teams. And you would see, now that said, Deloitte Consulting has a whole branch that's dedicated to this. Like they have people who implement the newest versions of SAP or NetSuite or Tableau or Salesforce. Like a huge portion of their business is dedicated to that. And the other piece, and this is a question I have for you, is they do the IT side, but they also contribute on the strategic side. And being able to weave those together seems to be a really unique value prop for companies that they work with. And it sounds like sometimes you do that, and sometimes it's just purely, here's your spreadsheets. So what does that look like, and how are you contributing strategically?
That's the part that gets me super jazzed. That's like the fun part. That's the poker part where you get to allocate capital and basically experiment. I wanted to be a scientist growing up. I wanted to run experiments and hypothesize and then like test the results. And this is like my version of that. So one of the things that I experienced at Meaty was that having an outsourced accounting firm, but an insourced or in-house finance team created a big kind of gap between what one party knew and what one didn't. And so that was one of the ideas behind Analyst House was bring accounting and finance both under the same roof so that one party knows the same information as the other. And so, yeah, we've got like 12 clients right now, and probably about 8 of them are accounting, and about 8 of them are finance or advisory, whatever you want to call it too. So there's some intersection and overlap between those, and some are just accounting, some are just finance, but wherever we can weave them together, I think it makes a lot of sense because, no one likes to pay for accounting. It's required by the government, and that's why so many accountants have a job. And it feels bad that that's the reason why people are paying you. I want to provide value to people's businesses. So, even when someone doesn't hire us, Analyst House, for advisory services, I'm always looking at the P&L as a fractional CFO and figuring out where's their opportunity here, and it's lots of simple tweaks, lots of little levers to pull. It's rarely like, you accidentally spent 10% of your revenue on this line item that you shouldn't have. It's mostly like, hey, we can find 1% here, we can find 3% here. Like, you're getting paid by credit card, you're paying 3% fees on that. Like, let's get paid by ACH. Let's call QuickBooks and get the better rates on ACH payments. And we've just saved you 2.1% of your revenue every year, which, it's meaningful. It's thousands to tens of thousands of dollars for most of these small businesses.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, in the long run, assuming that what you're building scales kind of like the foreshadowing of your tutoring business did. Like, if you get to a point where, like maybe you're hiring the kids from Leeds, that 2% of, a Deloitte equivalent client is a much bigger number. And so the fact that you're already kind of tooling out the process there, to your point, it's like you're improving your hand, and then you're able to go all in with that. Like, you're able to continue to grow it and scale it.
100%. Yeah. I love all the analogies you're throwing out there.
Yeah, right? Well, I mean, you dropped them at the beginning, and they do translate for sure. Now, I think one piece that I kind of want to shift to here as we kind of dovetail more into like the personal experience side of it is, what has your experience been as an entrepreneur? And one thing I know that we want to talk about is like the mental health side of everything, being a business professional, because it is very easy to just put 100 hours a week and slog through it and not take care of yourself. So How has that balance been for you? What have you been finding as some of the challenges, some opportunities to make it work better? What's going on that side for you?
It's gotten better in the last few months, but actually at the start, I was having a really hard time. I kind of went cold turkey. A lot of people say you should build your side business on nights and weekends, which I did to some extent, but before I had it all figured out, I went all in here. And then I moved to Houston with my girlfriend, which took away a lot of the joyful things in my life, like the mountains and like the ocean and like an active community, and good weather, um, and vegetarian food. No, I'm just kidding. It was tough at the start. I felt like I had a lot of eggs in like one or two client baskets. And while the P&L of our business, like I'm being wildly transparent, much to my like parents' chagrin. I'm just gonna I think I'm trying to build a community of founders who are intrigued and invested in what we're building too. That's going to be the marketing arm of this. So I shared online our P&L, which is we made $8,000 in January, like month 2 of running this business, and it looks healthy the whole way through, but it doesn't tell the whole story that in those first 4 or 5 months, I had 2 clients really, and one of them was not very satisfied, didn't think they were getting all the value, so they like downgraded, I would say, their retainer to then a lesser retainer, then to hourly work, and I kind of felt like the world was crashing down upon me, and it resulted in lots of emotional breakdowns and stress, and it was not that chill. And I considered applying to jobs several times, and I almost did. I called my old boss who was hiring for a role, and I was like, hey, would you consider me? He's like, yeah, but why? And I was like, well, because this is kind of brutal. And he was like, I ultimately decided not to. He goes, that's the right decision. You should keep pushing forward. But yeah, the combination of just going all in on this thing and moving to a brand new place that lacked a lot of my emotional outlets before, made it a really tough first 8 months, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. I can resonate with that. When I left Deloitte to start Metamorphic Synergies, it didn't exactly take off. You know what I mean? Like, it was not. I've learned a lot, and I've learned that this is something that is more of a long run build, and my intention is more about inspiring people than it is about necessarily turning a profit with this. And that time will come, and I'm looking forward to that season. But there was a period of time there where, I was focused a lot on yoga, on mental health, on physical health, and at the same time didn't feel like I was fully living in a way where I was contributing meaningfully and taking on responsibility and growing and really honoring that. I felt like I was more just, teaching some yoga and not really there wasn't a deeper level there that I've kind of stepped into now. And I can definitely understand that not being in an environment where you're surrounded by nature, you can get outside, you can go for hikes, you can ski, you have good friends, you can play those things matter so much. And I think that oftentimes when we just look at, to your point, the P&L, we miss what's going on in life. And we as humans are so much more than that. And so it seems like you're in a better spot now. Not saying that you have to be. None of us are really, right? Everyone's got things going on.
Yeah.
But what's changed for you, man? How's mental health for you now? And in that, do you feel like there's any pieces of advice or things that you've gleaned from that experience that you can offer to people who might be in a similar situation?
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're in a better spot too. It's you've got to find your own way through it. You can't, no one can tell you need to do this. And then like, I couldn't just David Goggins it, like, but yeah, things are looking up. Mostly I kind of started Analyst House for a few reasons. I love working with founders and building stuff. I like just seeing things get bigger. Like I built Legos as a kid. I built the tutoring business. I really just like building things. But I also wanted freedom in my life. I wanted the freedom to travel, and I wanted the freedom to work from anywhere and not have a boss to report into, and to live life on my own terms and not on the terms of my employer. But I didn't feel freedom at the start. I felt really kind of constrained, even if those companies weren't explicitly putting that pressure on me. I still work with both of them. I love them both very much, and we have a really good working relationship. But I was imposing a lot of pressure on myself that I had to perform and commit everything in my health and my mental health. Like my identity was my ability to grow this business. And so when I had like a down month, I was like, this isn't how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be like that way. But in the last few months, my girlfriend works here in Houston, and she got the ability to spend the summer working remotely. She works at a nonprofit, so they are kind of on the school calendar. And so we spent the summer in Colorado, kind of couch surfing, living it up, working out of coffee shops and the living room and making it work. And I realized I actually did have that freedom that I thought I didn't have for the longest time. I felt trapped I was like, I'm getting rid of my one boss. I'm going to have 0 bosses. And then I had like several bosses, all of whom were very demanding. So I 2 steps. One, diversify the revenue sources to multiple clients. So if I lose one, it's no longer the end of the world. That took a lot of the pressure off. And 2, I actually traveled and like acted upon that freedom that this life and job and career and company was supposed to afford me in the first place.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I had a previous guest on here who's actually the co-founder of this co-working space that I'm in, where this podcast is happening right now. And he wrote this book called Anti-Burnout, and he's a leadership coach for founders, executives, etc., and also a lifestyle piece. Like there's a wellness lifestyle thread in there. And a huge piece of it is evaluating your vision. Like actually have a vision of what you want as what you're striving towards, and bake those metrics in, right? So like your ability to get outside should be something that's evaluated in your overall growth and performance of the thing you're building. Otherwise, those things, I mean, you very much get that, what gets measured gets managed. And so he's got like a unique frame and perspective there that it seems like has been supportive for you for sure. And I mean, for those of you that are listening that are going hard, because the other side of this, which is kind of what I was talking about with my first endeavor with Metamorphic Synergies, was that there is hard work. Like at the end of the day, you need to go hard to create something successful. Like there's competition out here, and that's good, and it drives us to get better. But we can't shy away from that. Like you do have to work really hard, but there's a sustainability element to that where you can't just sprint it for decades. There has to be a healthy rhythm in there.
For sure. Have you heard how Mr. Beast kind of he'll work nonstop for like 9 days or 10 days, like 12, 16 hours, like all waking hours, wake up, grind. And then on any random days, like I'm tired, I need to rest. And he'll just take a day or two and do absolutely nothing. And then he'll start back up and he'll go for like, 7 to 12 more days and then lay down for 2 days and do nothing. That's a crazy cycle. Like I just find that to be like really insane, which is why I bring it up. It's like, maybe I'm just trying to be contrarian here, but I think that's like, it's crazy that people can do that. I cannot do that.
Yeah, right. I do think everyone has their own unique, healthy rhythm, right? Like, so that's part of that healthy. So I'm working on a healthy living book right now that I was telling you about.
Yeah.
And a huge portion of that is designing, adapting, and evolving our own unique, healthy rhythms in our life. Because for him, if that's healthy, like if that's something where he feels like he can contribute, his relationships are good, his physical, mental health is in a good spot, awesome. But I'm more like you. Like I need to find a rhythm within the day where I can thrive and contribute maximally at a few points throughout the day.
Yeah. I've found like there's some saying, I forget half of it, but they say like stress is just the difference between like what you've actually done and what you think you need to do or something like that. Again, I'm just, I don't know why I bring that up. It's kind of contrary to your point, but I oftentimes I find myself super stressed out, but like eating dinner lackadaisically, like watching a TV show, and I'm like, I just need to spend 30 minutes and do this shit right now and crank it out, and then I feel so much better. So there is a lot of hard work involved, but I'm trying to move back to Colorado to design my life around this system that you're talking about. I'm trying to be more intentional about finding the time for the things that help me to reset. And I imagine that you're kind of, what's your routine like for like the work reset cycle?
I'm definitely not perfect with it. So like right now, my current role, while this is my side hustle, and that's actually one thing we want to get into is side hustles, bootstraps, VC, those pieces. But for me right now, Metamorphic Synergies is my side hustle. And my full-time role is I'm a regional manager for Stretch Lab here in the Springs. So I oversee 4 assisted stretching studios.
Cool.
And there's a good amount of work involved with that. And that's been a recent promotion where I've stepped into that role. And so I'm still kind of trying to find those opportunities to live a healthier life. But as of right now, what it looks like, I give myself maybe 2 hours in the morning that include, let the dogs out, get some water, read some scripture, spend more time outside, maybe take the dogs for a walk. If I have time, get some yoga, some movement, some breath, maybe some like sprint intervals and skip dynamic work outside on the driveway. People probably think I look hilarious, but hey, maybe it'll inspire them. and then I go to work, whatever that looks like, but I'll contribute meaningfully. On different days, let's say maybe I don't have time where I'm doing Stretch Lab stuff, and I get to sit down for something like this. It's still a pretty similar morning routine, and then a big bulk of work during the day. And then in the evening, this is the part that I've been really trying to work on, because if work goes till 7, it's hard to exercise, cook a healthy dinner, and get to sleep. So if I can get out of work by 5, 6, then I can do that. Exercise, cook a healthy meal, hang out with the animals a little more, and then go to bed. And so that's my ideal rhythm. And then on the weekends, I try and get at least one day of hiking or skiing or just something where I can get outside. Like we should ski sometime if you get back here, because that is no hands bar. Like that's my thing. I love to ski.
Where do you ski mostly?
I have the Epic Pass. So my brother-in-law, Rob, he was an instructor in Vail for 3 years. So he knows every little hidden gem and all the like extreme spots and the spots where the powder accumulates, but people don't ski it. And so, and I will not mention what those are, but point being, I get so much joy. Like if people see us skiing, they'll hear us first because we're just screaming joy as we're going down the mountain. And that fills my cup so much. So then when I step into work then for the following week, Like, you can't think about your to-do list when you're going 50 miles an hour down a ski run. You know what I mean? Like, you are in it. And so I feel like those things help me kind of clear my head and create that space for me to find my rhythm.
That's awesome. Everyone needs that in their life. It's something that pulls you into the moment, in that moment, and you have no choice or else you die.
Yeah, and I think, maybe even there's also a beauty element to nature and an immersive element to it. That, like, one of the terms that gets thrown around in some of the research on the mental health benefits of time outside is called forest bathing. And it's basically like, by just spending hours, whether it's 2 or 72 hours outside, it resets your circadian rhythm. You get the grounding, the views, and the beauty in nature just naturally calm your nervous system down.
Yeah.
And then that translates to our mental space.
Just talking about it, I feel so much better. I crave that. Houston is not really conducive to an outdoor lifestyle.
Is there anything that can be done? Like, do they have some parks? Is there?
Yeah. There's actually some great parks, and there's also a bike trail on the bayou. It kind of looks like the LA River. It's like a concrete basin. But there's a super long bike trail that you can run or bike on, and then there's a park called Memorial Park, which is twice the size of Central Park in New York. They've got lots of running trails there. I mean, I could probably utilize it a bit better, but what I really liked about Colorado and Boulder specifically was everything was accessible on foot or on a bicycle, and it's a much different amount of effort to get up early, to then get in your car and drive 20 minutes to the park to go on a run, than to just hop out of bed and go on a run. So
yeah,
working it in, but really the main goal is to make it back to a place that is conducive to those things kind of happening naturally every day, because everyone around you's outside and moving their bodies.
Yeah. One of the things I like to think about there is big shifts and little shifts. So, like, big shift, move to Colorado. Definitely what we don't want to do is not think about those big shifts, right? We want to still be moving towards that vision, but that doesn't mean we need to ignore the little shifts. Like, where are the little things that we can do that we can just get, even if it's not a park, but it's like a walk outside and there's some sunlight involved. Like, that's still something,
100%. I really like that a lot. And I think, let's bring it back full circle. That applies to businesses so much. There's big shifts and there's little shifts, and it takes a lot more kind of courage to make a big shift in your life or in a business, but oftentimes it's the right move. Like, I talked to this friend of mine, a friend's dad, who's now a friend of mine, who had a really successful business, a really large business. They were doing they did over $500 million of revenue every year. And he scaled, they raised no funding ever. And it was like a 30 or 40 year kind of in the family business. And about a couple years before they sold it completely, they raised money from a private equity firm, and they kept tweaking and adding people and growing. But then the private equity firm came in and said they ran the analysis, and they're not known for being like very nice about emotion has no place in private equity, I think. So they just shut down an entire arm of the business that was less profitable than the rest. And that's a big shift. And that's something that I think about for my business a lot, since he told me this story a few weeks ago. He was like, I was too emotional to make that big shift, but it cleared the runway for us to then scale by, he gave me this crazy, the last 7 years they were in business, they scaled at 36% per year in revenue. So it's you gotta look for ways to make little shifts, but the big shifts really sometimes are the ones that move the needle.
Yeah, and what's interesting too that you touch on there is those big shifts can come from logic, or they can also come from like a calling. Like you just sort of feel that that's the right move. And it's nice when you have some data that can support those shifts. Otherwise, they can be a little bit daunting. But sometimes, like you did with the Analyst House, you got to burn the boats. Like you go for it and you see what happens. And a huge piece on that too, actually, we can kind of round out here is faith, right? Like trusting that there's a greater plan going on with a lot of this stuff and being able to walk in that. And so, what's your relationship been like over the years with God, with a higher power, and how has that shown up for you in your business endeavors?
It's evolved a lot to maybe this isn't what you want to hear, but it's let's see, I'll give you the whole backstory. I grew up going to a Catholic church. My dad's side of the family were Irish Catholic. He was one of 9 children. I have a ton of aunts and uncles and cousins, and it was a great community. I have an uncle who's a Catholic priest. So I went through the church, went to Sunday school, did Bible study, made it probably until I was like 13 or 14. And then my dad had a health scare. He had a kind of growth, a tumor almost like on his brain stem, more or less. And no one knew about it. And then it happened very quickly. And then he had to go get emergency surgery, and he had like a 50-50 shot of the surgery succeeding. It was pretty scary. They didn't tell us at the time the risk involved. And, he was a faithful man. He still is. And he asked for his last rites just in case, the last sacrament before you die in the Catholic Church. And then apparently it didn't meet the risk threshold for the priest, and they refused him that sacrament. And then my mom's side of the family was Methodist. It still is, and has a great community back home. And so the pastor at the Methodist church came and spent the entire day with him before the surgery, just sat in the hospital room and like kept him company. And so from that moment forward, we were a Methodist family. The surgery went well. Everything was back to normal. And then we went to that church for a long time. My parents and grandparents still go. My parents were married in that church. And over the last several years, since college, I would say, I've become pretty, I would say I'm super open and kind of seeking moments of spirituality, but I claim that I don't think that I could possibly know whether there is or is not any higher power. And as much as I believe that there could be, I also believe there could not be. And so I believe that puts me pretty stark in the middle of the agnostic category, but open to kind of mysticism and a higher power. And I think life's a lot better when you have something to kind of fall back on, or a belief system or a community, or a belief that everything's going to work out because it's going to. And so for that reason, I respect it, and I will kind of seek it sometimes, but most of the time, not really. That's my latest feeling on religion these days.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think anyone that tells you that they've got it completely figured out to go back to the reading people thing, like I get a check with that, because I do think that, to your point, we can't fully know God in our current experience. As part of the nature of our experiences, there's this mystery element to it. And for me, what's been most affirming that there is some sense of a higher power, for me, it's like full on God and a savior in Jesus, because I feel that there's that nature of sin and that redemptive nature and the humility that's associated with honoring that gift that comes from God. But I don't take it as literally as traditional Christianity might. I think there's much deeper metaphor involved with that whole story. But for me, the way I really see God in my life is in nature, and it's in relationships, and it's in miracles and serendipity. Like there's so much. You love science, right? So like to see physics and the creation of the universe and microbiology and quantum physics and how complex all of that is, and then to see how much more complex we are in our spirits, for me, that there's divine creation in that. And so that's what gives me a sense of a fairly strong convicted sense of a higher power, a creator, and in some sense a savior, because I know I'm not perfect, and I know that God sees us in our imperfection here in this human world, and in some sense honors it and still loves us the same way that a parent still loves a child when they make a mistake. And the fact that that shows up in our lives as parents and children and friends, there's so much there that just points me in the direction of a loving God. That, like, part of the reason I created this whole podcast, it's about faith, health, nature, and community. And that faith piece is always a leap. You can't logically get to faith. There's
it's
that
inherent in the definition. Yeah, I come in and out. I phase in and out of faith in different things. But thank you for sharing. And I think it's a really enduring, like, philosophy and kind of like way of living, and it's brought a lot of people a lot of like peace and joy. And I think for me it serves a purpose. It taught me a lot of my values, I would say, is church. And I always kind of took the lessons as metaphors, and that was perfectly okay with me. But I like to live by those metaphors as metaphors, and I'm pretty happy to do that. But giving back is part of the long range plan for Ranger and Analyst House, and I think I picked some of these like characteristics and like values up from my time going to church. So I'm grateful for the part they've played in my life at this point.
Yeah, like that right there is one of those things that I think is maybe a different perspective that I share than the traditional Christian bucket. Is like someone who, like, to say you believe in something is not just to verbally express that, it's to live it in your values, because that's what real belief is. And that notion of wanting, like, someone who expresses that they believe in taking care of people or giving back versus someone who lives that and does it. There's the story in scripture about in the end times, or when you go to heaven and you say, like, but Jesus, I talked about you all the time. And he's like, I don't know who you are. Like, versus like, so here's another real story. So my mom, I don't know if you saw this in the podcast, my mom passed from cancer 2 or 3 years ago.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that, Roger. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for sure. And there was like 2 or 3 months where we were caring for her full time. And my parents were what I would call spiritually agnostic, maybe something similar to where you are. Like, they knew something was going on to some extent, but it wasn't a traditional Christian dynamic. They didn't really find a lot of fulfillment in what the church was preaching. And so our family focused on be a good person, be kind to people, show up, love, like lean into love. And that was very much how my mom lived, especially in her later years. And I just feel it in the core of my spirit and some of the miracles that I've seen over the years since she's passed, that she is in heaven in some metaphorical, non-understandable way of describing that. And she shows up in different ways. And so I think that, to your point, like it is just, it's not traditional. It's not something we can totally wrap our head around, but there's something there. Just can't quite put a thumb on it.
It's the simulation. I'm kidding.
Maybe. I think it's deeper than that. Like I think simulation is one other word to try and describe creation, which is another word to try and describe the thing that we're talking about.
You shared something very vulnerable. I didn't mean to just kind of make a joke out of it, but I agree with you. I think I'm searching for the aha moment, but I feel like there's something special about this consciousness to some extent. So I appreciate your perspective on it.
Yeah, there's something going on there. But I think anyone that tells you they've got it down and you should believe what they're saying, it's not about that. It's about our individual experience with that ineffable substance.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, brother, I feel like this has been an awesome conversation. Like, I feel like we've really hit a lot of buckets, and I feel like this applies to people in a lot of different ways. Is there anything else that because your experience is unique, man. Like, a lot of people don't step out of the traditional university model, let alone then step out of their unconventional model to do their own thing. So in that journey, is there anything you feel like you maybe haven't touched on that you just want to pour into people that might be, like if you were going to talk to Ranger at 19, someone else that's in that same boat, like what kind of advice or perspective might you give?
I would probably tell my 19-year-old self to try and build a company during college. I'm super gung-ho focused on building a company that provides a lot of value to a lot of other companies at this point. Analyst houses, at least through the end of this decade, it's my baby and my focus. And kind of like you said, anyone who says that they've got it figured out is full of it. Like in life, in business, in faith, in any aspect of human experience. You only learn in business, in my experience, through failing. And sometimes you've got a mentor or a boss who will gently catch you as you fail and push you in the right direction. Sometimes you just fall flat on your face. And you need that. In most areas of life, I would say, to progress, failure is the only way. If you just keep succeeding. Yeah. So I would say start whatever it is you're kind of hoping to do. The sooner you start it, the sooner you'll be at that on the way, at least. There is no like, I keep hearing the people I look up to, mostly through podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. A lot of kind of successful business people say, I was dreaming of the day that I achieved this milestone and that I would be happy once I achieve this milestone. I come to realize that it's a journey. You have to experience it along the way. You can't like say, I will do this in the future at some other point in time, but I would say start that journey as soon as possible. I think we're headed right now towards this like future where starting a company is so easy and quick. Entrepreneurship is like for everybody. And if you feel stuck in your hamster wheel, dedicate one weekend day or one day off per week to just like researching ideas, or call everyone. Probably most people know one or two people who have a business. Call them and ask them what's the most painful thing that they're experiencing in their business, and then offer to do it for them for free for a while. And then after a month or two, once you're good at it, you can offer it to other people for money, and then you've got a business. So I as far as entrepreneurship goes, start soon if it's something you ever aspired to do. That's my suggestion.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Ranger, thank you for coming on the Come to Listen podcast, brother. I really appreciate you being here.
It's super great to spend time with you, Roger. You're always like exuding positivity. It's a nice way to end the week. It's good to see it. Let's do it again soon.
100%, brother. Yeah, looking forward to it. And for those of you that are interested in learning about Analyst House, it's analysthouse.io, right? That's the website?
That's the one.
Yeah, so go check it out. Check out Ranger on LinkedIn if that's where you're seeing this. Thank you all so much for tuning into this show. God bless you.